May 23, 2023. Before sunrise, the streets of Birmingham and Solihull erupted in a coordinated strike. 17 doors smashed open at the exact same moment. Armed officers surged inside, seizing phones still buzzing with orders, stacks of cash, and Class A drugs ready for the streets. It wasn't random. This was the climax of Operation Hunterian, the largest county lines investigation ever carried out by West Midlands Police. And at its center stood four names that once ruled the city like clockwork: Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter. For 18 months, this coalition moved like a machine, pumping heroin and crack cocaine through Birmingham every single day, generating nearly £2 million. But on one May morning, the empire collapsed. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself, what happens when this channel disappears tomorrow and you never hear stories like this again? Don't risk missing the truth. Subscribe now. And if you think you'll just do it later, write in the comments why you'd rather stay in the dark. To understand the fall of Birmingham's four lines, we first need to step back into the city's streets in 2022. Birmingham and nearby Solihull were facing a growing crisis. Police data showed that Class A drug use, heroin and crack cocaine, was fueling addiction, petty crime, and violence. Entire communities were trapped in the cycle, users stealing to fund habits, dealers recruiting the desperate, and families left to deal with the fallout. This was the world of county lines. Small gangs who used dedicated mobile phones to sell drugs, with runners delivering orders straight to users. Normally, these lines fought against each other. Turf wars, stabbings, and constant competition kept them divided. But in late 2022, Birmingham saw something unusual. For separate county lines, each already profitable, made the decision to join forces. They were known on the streets as Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter. Instead of rivals, they became partners, pooling resources and sharing customers. Together, they built a network that spread through Birmingham and Solihull like clockwork, ensuring that no addict was left without supply, no matter the hour. Detectives later said it was unlike anything they had encountered before. This coalition made the gangs harder to disrupt, more resilient, and far more dangerous. Each line had its own operators. The Rico line, run by brothers Adam and Harun Iqbal, alongside Mohammed Usman. The Diego line, controlled by Yasin Sadiq, with runners Adam Slater and Tiana Phillips. The Figo line, headed by Ilas Sadiq and supported by Mark Seeley and Amani Adams. And the Potter line, led by Anis Mahmood and Hume Rahman, with a key figure named Levi McQuitter at its center. Together, these four operations formed a coalition that flooded Birmingham's streets with heroin and crack cocaine. In just 18 months, the network made nearly £1.8 million, servicing over 200 addicts and taking more than 1,000 calls every single day. It was a criminal empire built not on rivalry, but on unity. The four lines that came together in Birmingham didn't appear overnight. Each had been built carefully, street by street, call by call. The Rico line, controlled by Adam and Harun Iqbal alongside Mohammed Usman, operated from properties in Hodge Hill. Their phones acted as command centers, dispatching orders to runners who delivered heroin and crack across East Birmingham. The Diego line, under Yasin Sadiq, relied on younger runners like Adam Slater and Tiana Phillips. They moved constantly through Solihull, answering phone calls and making drops. Police later described them as the foot soldiers, visible on the ground, but essential to keeping the line active. The Figo line, run by Ilas Sadiq with help from Mark Seeley and Amani Adams, mirrored the same structure. Call phones, trusted runners, and constant movement around shops and side streets where addicts gathered. And the Potter line, overseen by Anis Mahmood and Hume Rahman, extended the network further. Each line kept its own phone, its own customers, and its own runners, but together, they reinforced one another. Runners were often chosen for their vulnerability, people in need of money or users themselves who could be controlled through debt and supply. Many were rewarded with extra deals or pressured into topping up the gang's phones in exchange for drugs. For addicts, trust was built not with friendship, but with consistency. A bulk text message would go out, hundreds at a time, advertising Rico, Diego, Figo, or Potter. Within minutes, a runner would arrive. no waiting, no missed orders. That reliability tied users to the lines as tightly as any chain. And while each group appeared separate, detectives soon realized they were linked together by one crucial figure. A man who kept the supply moving, who made sure no line ever ran dry. His name was Levi McWhitter. And his role would prove to be the coalition's greatest strength, and its greatest weakness. By early 2023, the Birmingham coalition was running at full strength. The Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter lines were no longer just separate operations. Together, they became a machine that never stopped turning. At the center of their power were the phones. Each line controlled at least one dedicated handset, sending out bulk text messages to hundreds of users at once. The wording was simple, coded offers of heroin and crack cocaine, sent daily, ensuring addicts were reminded exactly where to buy. The calls that followed were relentless. Police later estimated more than 1,000 phone calls came through every single day. The orders were constant, and the runners never stopped moving. The numbers told the story of just how vast this network had become. Detectives calculated that the four lines were generating between £18,000 and £20,000 every week. Over an 18-month period, the coalition brought in nearly £1.8 million, feeding more than 200 regular users across Birmingham and Solihull. And unlike rival groups who fought for territory, these lines worked together. If one phone went quiet, another line filled the gap. If a runner was arrested or delayed, another stepped in. It was cooperation rarely seen in county lines operations, and it made the coalition far harder to disrupt. But police were watching. The County Lines Task Force began mapping out the activity, patterns of phone use, CCTV trails, and movements that kept circling the same areas of Birmingham. And then, in early February 2023, came a break. A simple car stop in Solihull would begin to unravel everything. Think about this, these gangs spread because no one paid attention until it was too late. If you scroll away without subscribing, you're repeating the same mistake. Are you comfortable being the kind of person who looks away until the damage is done? If so, tell us in the comments why you're okay with ignorance. By the spring of 2023, the coalition of four drug lines had reached its peak. The Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter lines moved heroin and crack cocaine through Birmingham and Solihull with an efficiency rarely seen in county lines investigations. The money was constant. Week after week, the phones rang with orders, and the runners never stopped delivering. The cash flowed quickly, thousands of pounds every week. Court records later showed how the defendants lived from their earnings. Expensive clothes, designer shoes, and cash spent freely. Some drove cars far beyond what their day-to-day lives could explain. It wasn't the wealth of an international cartel, but for local operators, it was enough to stand out. What they didn't see was the quiet build-up of pressure behind the scenes. West Midlands police had been watching them for months. Detectives monitored CCTV footage that placed key suspects at shops where the phones were topped up. They followed cars linked to deliveries. They tracked bulk text messages that were identical across different lines, proof that the groups were working together. Every move the coalition thought was invisible was being recorded, documented, and prepared for the day the task force would strike. At the surface, the four lines were at the height of their power. But just beneath, their empire was already beginning to crack. The empire began to unravel not in a dramatic raid, but in something far more ordinary, routine car stops. In early 2023, officers in Solihull pulled over a vehicle linked to suspected drug runners. Inside were Adam Slater and Tiana Phillips, two names that, until then, operated quietly in the background of the network. The search uncovered multiple wraps of Class A drugs. More crucially, police seized phones tied directly to the active drug lines. For investigators, it was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Those handsets became the skeleton key to the entire operation. The bulk text messages, the call records, and the stored numbers of hundreds of users all mapped out how the coalition worked. From that moment, surveillance intensified. Detectives began linking the phones to addresses, vehicles, and movements across Birmingham and Solihull. CCTV footage matched suspects topping up credit, while undercover teams watched runners hand over drugs in plain sight. Every call, every text, and every journey fed into a growing intelligence picture. The 4 lines, once thought untouchable, were now under constant observation. By May 2023, police had gathered enough evidence to dismantle the network completely. And as dawn approached on the 23rd of May, the task force prepared to strike with full force. You've made it this far into their empire's downfall. If you don't subscribe now, are you admitting you don't value the hours of research that went into bringing this to you? If you really believe that, leave a comment explaining why. Otherwise, hit subscribe before you regret it. Dawn broke on the 23rd of May, 2023. Across Birmingham and Solihull, the silence was shattered as West Midlands police executed 17 simultaneous raids. Doors splintered. Officers in body armor surged through homes, seizing control of the empire that had once seemed untouchable. Inside, they found what 18 months of surveillance had predicted. Wraps of heroin and crack cocaine, ready for sale. Thousands of pounds in cash, stacked and hidden in everyday places. Dozens of phones, the lifeline of the 4 drug lines, were still vibrating with orders as they were bagged into evidence. One by one, the coalition's leaders were taken into custody. The names that once carried fear, Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter, were now reduced to files, handcuffs, and custody cells. What the public saw as a single morning of chaos was, in truth, the carefully timed conclusion of nearly 2 years of investigation. For the first time, Birmingham's largest county lines coalition was dismantled in its entirety. The collapse of the Birmingham Drug Coalition was not just about the raids and seizures. It ended in the courtroom, where the scale of the empire was laid bare before the judge, the jury, and the public. What followed was a series of heavy sentences that dismantled the network piece by piece. Each defendant stood in the dock, their role in the operation exposed, and their freedom slipping away. First was Adam Iqbal, aged 28, of Ward End Park Road. A key player in the organization, Iqbal was involved in managing the drug lines that pumped heroin and crack into Birmingham's streets. For his role, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Alongside him was Ains Mahmood, just 24, from Parkfield Road in Alum Rock. Despite his young age, he played a central part in running the lines and controlling the flow of drugs. He too was jailed for 12 years. From Fernbank Road came Mohammed Yassin Sadiq, aged 27. He was identified as an active member of the network, deeply tied into the daily supply chain. For his role, he was sentenced to 11 years behind bars. His older brother, Elias Sadiq, 28, also of Fernbank Road, worked closely with him in the same network. Together they formed a family link in the organization. The judge handed him 10 years and 10 months in prison. Another prominent figure was Levi Mukwita, 25, of Wallbank Court. He was linked directly to the movement of drugs and cash through the coalition's operations. For his part, he was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months. The same sentence was given to Mohammed Usman, 26, of Hodge Hill Road. Investigators revealed his involvement in the supply network, and the court ordered him to serve 10 years and 6 months. At just 21 years old, Manny Adams, of Drews Lane, was one of the youngest members of the group. Despite his age, he had already embedded himself in the world of Class A drug supply. His involvement earned him a sentence of 8 years in prison. Harun Iqbal, aged 34, of Dryley Grove in Birmingham, was another link in the coalition. His role in distributing drugs across the city led to him being jailed for 6 years and 4 months. Also just 21 was Adam Slater, of Tyburn Road. Slater was drawn into the criminal enterprise and played a part in the organization's network. The court sentenced him to 6 years. Hummer Ul Rahman, 27, of Raymond Road, was another man brought down by the coalition's collapse. His role in the drug lines resulted in a sentence of 6 years in prison. From Draycote Avenue came Tiana Phillips, aged 23. One of the younger members of the group, her participation in the coalition's operation led to her being jailed for 5 years. And finally, Mark Seeley, 36, of 9 Acres Drive in Solihull. Seeley's involvement may not have reached the heights of others in the network, but it was still serious enough to earn him 4 years and 8 months in prison. Each sentence was a marker of accountability. Collectively, they removed years, decades, of freedom from those who believed they could profit endlessly from addiction and misery. Yet the impact of their crimes cannot be measured only in years behind bars. The damage done to communities, the lives lost to drugs, and the families broken by addiction will remain long after these sentences are served. This case is a reminder that the drug trade is not glamour but destruction. It is not profit, but pain. And while these men and women will spend much of their future behind prison walls, the struggle against the addiction crisis continues on the streets outside. These criminals will spend decades behind bars. But you? You'll spend just 1 second hitting subscribe. If you still don't, explain in the comments why you think your time is more valuable than justice, truth, and stories no one else dares to tell.